piano music, lovers of piano music only. And the piano music that I choose to play is Beethoven's. Now you know as well as I do, Beethoven's instrument of instruments was the piano. And he was a virtuoso. He started playing the piano or taking lessons when he was 5 years old. And his father was his teacher. But he advanced so quickly that his father no longer could keep up with Beethoven. So he had to bring in other teachers. And so Beethoven himself had very many mentors and helped him develop his style. Now he was, in his early career, he was known as a pianist. Of course, he didn't want to be remembered as a pianist. He wanted to be remembered as a composer. But when his hearing started to go in around 1800, he had to give some of his performances to friends. But the work that he did was composition. Nevertheless, he started out basically with simple things like sonatas. Piano sonata is usually a piano alone. If it's a violin sonata, it's the violin and the piano. If it's a cello sonata, it's a cello and the piano. But in this case, I'm talking about his piano sonatas. And he did 35 of them. 3 of them were done when he was 12 years old. And they called them the juvenile sonatas, the electoral sonatas, the Kurfürsten sonatas. Those were the names of those 3 sonatas, which I think are legitimate sonatas, beautiful. But for some reason, the people who have the power call only 32 of his the major ones. You've heard of some of them: the Moonlight, the Pathétique, the Appassionata, the Waldstein. You've heard some of these famous sonatas, and he did most of these sonatas early in his career. Never once was one of those sonatas performed in public, which is amazing. The 32 that he did were mainly done, again, in his early years, from 1800, or should I say 1790 to about 1810, 1812. After that, it was less piano sonatas, but more concertos. So Beethoven exceeded in concertos. And what is a concerto? Usually it's one instrument and an orchestra. It could be 2 instruments. It could be 3 instruments. Beethoven wrote a triple concerto for the piano, cello, and violin. And that was his only triple concerto. It's a beautiful piece. Doesn't get much of recognition, but it's a beautiful piece. But the concertos that he's remembered for are 5. 2 of them in 1795 and 97, 1 in 1810, 1 in 1807, one in 1811. So he had 5 sonatas, concertos, and his 6th one, he started in 1815, but it didn't come to fruition. For some reason, Beethoven never finished that. But we forget that Beethoven wrote another concerto when he was 14. In 1784, he wrote a piano concerto, which is a beautiful piece. Again, I don't know why they don't consider it one of his finer works. For a 14-year-old, it was awfully nice. And the concerto that he wrote then didn't get much publicity, but I'm aware of it, and anybody else who is a Beethoven fan is aware of that. Beethoven played the first performance of every concerto he wrote, except the 5th one. The 5th one was called the Emperor Concerto. And the reason he couldn't play that one in 1810, his hearing was pretty shot. And so he had to give it to his friend to play, Friedrich Schneider, who played it in 1812 in Leipzig, Germany, and then in 1811 in Vienna by one of his piano students named Carl Czerny. So Beethoven's contribution to the concerto world, by the way, you know the word concerto came from concert, arm in arm, shoulder to shoulder, in concert with each other. And so concerto came from that origination there. So I'm going to play some of the music from the sonatas and from the concerto. I may pick a couple of segments out. Then after that, Beethoven wrote bagatelles. Anybody know what a bagatelle is? A bagatelle is a trifle. It's a simple piece of music, no more than a trifle. And Beethoven wrote 24 bagatelles. 7 in the 1800s, early 1800s, 11 more in the 1819, 1820, and then the last 6 in 1824, 25. So Beethoven was pretty concerned and involved in his piano music, although in his latter years it became his string quartets that we became familiar with. And of course his orchestral work, you know, his symphonies, the 9 of them, except for number 9, were done during his heroic period. From 1803 to 1812, he wrote his 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th piano concertos. Orchestral symphony works. After that came some other things that he did in way of choral works and things of that nature. So, I'm going to play a bagatelle, and you're familiar with that bagatelle that I'm going to play, but I'm not going to tell you what it is now. I'm going to let you listen to it first and tell me what you think of it. The last thing I'm going to speak about, where I think Beethoven exceeded or excelled quite a bit, was in his piano variations. Beethoven could take a theme and vary that theme for quite a while. For example, in his Diabelli variations, he had 33 of them. The theme was a 50-second theme, 50 seconds, and Beethoven stretched it to an hour with 33 different variations of that theme. It was like one gem after another. I had my granddaughter do something to show you. These are like gems. The first one was the theme itself, and then everything after that was a variation of that theme. Now how Beethoven could squeeze 33 individual variations from a simple 50-second theme, to me, is incredible. And so he excelled a lot in his piano variations. He did 21 sets of piano variations, 14 of them before 1800. So I would say that one of his great contributions were his variations, because no one could improvise like Ludwig van Beethoven could. Was he a virtuoso in every sense of the word? Was there anyone else at the time that can compete with Beethoven? No. Any contest he ever came to, and he did that in his early years in Vienna, because he lived 22 years in Bonn, Germany, then moved to Vienna in 1792. He was just 22. And that's when he became known as not only a pianist, although he came as a pianist, he was known as a composer as well, because when they heard his concertos and his symphony in 1800, they could see that the man could compose just as well. So that's the last thing I'm going to talk about, the piano variations. And if we have any time, I brought a piece of bonus music that has nothing to do with Beethoven, or it may have something to do with Beethoven. I don't remember what I grabbed this morning, but it's something beautiful. Otherwise, I wouldn't have taken it here as a bonus piece. So the first thing we do, listen a little bit to the Moonlight. And by the way, if you're wondering all these pictures, what they stand for, I think you should know what that they are. This one is a picture of Beethoven when he was just about 45 years old, right here. And this gentleman back here was the one who gave the Moonlight Sonata. Not working. Oh, here it is. When gave the Moonlight Sonata his name was Rellstab. This is Beethoven when he was just 30 years old, when he wrote Fidelio, his only opera. And here's a picture of Beethoven when he was just 12. And here's a picture of Beethoven playing for Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Beethoven performed for Mozart, and Mozart said, keep an eye on this kid. He's going to give the world something to talk about. And that was in 1787 when Beethoven was just 17 years old. He performed for Mozart. And it's tough to play something for Mozart for sure, because Mozart was the greatest pianist at the time. And I think Beethoven took his place and went further. And then here's another picture of Giulietta Giocardi. Giulietta Giocardi was the one he dedicated the Moonlight Sonata to, because Beethoven was in love most of his life. Not with the same person, with many people. She was one of the first ones. She was a piano student of his, only 17, 18. Beethoven was already 30 by that time. It wasn't meant to be. So Beethoven never really married, never had children, and dated a lot of women, but never more than 7 months. His longest relationship was 7 months. So the man was in love all the time, but couldn't find someone that suited him. But then again, what woman would want to live with a cranky, obnoxious, unpredictable, difficult, type of guy? Not an easy thing at all. But he did love women, there's no doubt about that. People who say he was homosexual, they don't know what they were talking about. There's no indication of that at all. Just like the woman said that he may have had syphilis, there was no positive evidence to that as well, so that's not in the picture. Nevertheless, I'm going to start out playing the Moonlight Sonata, and you remember that very well. Very sad. He was in love with Giulietta. She rejected him, and I think it's reflected in this piece.